The piercing knock shattered the pre-dawn quiet, jolting me awake with an abruptness that resonated deep in my bones. It was past 1 in the morning when my daughter, Clara, stumbled onto my doorstep, her small frame crumbling into my arms. Her left eye was a bruised, swollen purple, her lips split and crusted with dried blood. Between ragged sobs, she choked out the confession that turned my blood to ice. "He hit me, Mom, because of his mistress." I held her trembling body in silent shock, then guided her gently into the house. Without a single word, my hands moved with a chilling precision born of years on the force. I pulled my police uniform from the closet, the familiar blue fabric a grim comfort. Each buckle, each button, was a silent vow. My duty wasn't just to protect and serve. Tonight, it was intensely personal. My heart, a furious drum in my chest, armed itself with an unyielding resolve. Then I reached for my phone, dialing Arthur Miller's number. "Start the plan," I commanded, my voice low and steady. "Now." Just moments before, I'd slumped onto the sofa, eyes half closed, after an exhausting shift. Being an officer in this town often meant mundane paperwork, but today had involved a messy bar brawl that kept me writing reports until the early hours. My body ached, craving the oblivion of sleep. Outside, the familiar symphony of barking dogs mingled with the distant buzz of late-night motorcycles, a constant backdrop to our neighborhood that rarely truly slept. I'd assumed it was just the usual crew hanging out, trying to ignore the cacophony, but the sudden, urgent pounding on my door had instantly snapped me to full alert. My police instincts flared, adrenaline surging. Who could be knocking like that at this hour? I wondered, gripping a sturdy chair just in case. "Who is it?" My voice, though firm, held a tremor, not of fear, but of an ominous premonition. No one answered, only a few weaker, desperate knocks, followed by a choked, trembling whisper. "Mom, please open up." It was Clara, my daughter. I fumbled with the lock, my heart pounding. The moment the door swung inward, Clara collapsed into my embrace, trembling like a wounded bird. I held her tight, feeling the terrifying limpness of her body, as if all her life force had drained away. "Clara, what happened, honey?" I asked, my voice cracking with fear. The pale yellow porch light illuminated her face, and the sight froze me. Her lip was split, a jagged line of dried blood at the corner. Her left eye, swollen and bruised purple, could barely open. She clutched her stomach, as if trying to contain an unbearable agony. "Julian, my husband, he hit me because of his mistress," Clara whispered, her voice choked before dissolving into heart-wrenching sobs. My blood ran cold with fury, yet simultaneously, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. My daughter, the one I had raised and loved more than my own life, stood before me, utterly broken. I helped her inside, gently laying her on the sofa. I rushed to the kitchen for a damp cloth and the first aid kit. "Stay still, honey. Let me see," I murmured, striving for a calm I didn't feel. I carefully cleaned the blood from her lip, but it welled up again, a vivid crimson that seemed to cut into my own heart. The wound was deep, more than just skin. It carried a much profounder damage. Clara continued to clutch her stomach, her slender hands shaking uncontrollably. Gently, I pried her hands away, then lifted her blouse. A gasp caught in my throat. I nearly dropped the cloth. A monstrous bruise, black and purple, covered her abdomen, as if she had been struck not once, but repeatedly, viciously. I couldn't breathe, felt as though I had taken each blow myself. "Clara, who did this to you?" "It was Julian, wasn't it?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and overwhelming pain. Clara couldn't answer, only wept, her sobs echoing in the quiet house. Without another thought, I grabbed the phone and dialed the number etched into my memory, the town's emergency room. "Dr. Garcia, please prepare. I'm bringing my daughter in," I stated, urgency in my tone. My car was in the shop for brake repairs, so I quickly called a taxi. As we waited, I sat beside Clara, covering her with a blanket. Her cell phone, left on the table, wouldn't stop flashing. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw 7 missed calls from Julian and alarming messages scrolling across the lock screen. Open your mouth if you want to lose everything. Blood rushed to my head. I reached for the phone, wanting to see more, to understand the full extent of his cruelty. But Clara, weak as she was, snatched it away in a panic. Mom, don't look. It's nothing. Her eyes, wide with terror, pleaded with me, as if merely touching the phone would cause everything to fall apart. I didn't press her, just squeezed her hand, trying to calm her. I'm here, honey. Nothing is going to happen to you. But deep down, I knew this situation had already spiraled far beyond what I could control. When the taxi arrived, I helped Clara inside, supporting her frail body with one arm, clumsily carrying a small bag with the other. On the way to the hospital, she was hunched over, her head resting on my shoulder, repeating, "Forgive me, Mom. I didn't want to bother you at this hour, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to run here." Each word was a dagger twisting in my heart. I was her mother. I had promised to protect her all her life, and now she had been forced to seek refuge with me in the middle of the night, broken by the man I had once trusted. The taxi pulled up to the hospital, the cold white light of a neon sign starkly illuminating emergency room. I helped Clara out, my daughter barely able to stand, her body still shaking, clutching her stomach as if holding onto her last vestiges of strength. I squeezed her hand, trying to mask the frantic pounding of my own heart. "I'm here. Don't be afraid," I whispered, though I was terrified too. Dr. Sofia Garcia, on duty, was already waiting at the door. She looked at Clara, then at me, her expression worried but silent. She simply motioned for a nurse to guide my daughter to an examination room. I followed, my feet feeling as heavy as lead. When the nurse gently removed Clara's thin jacket, I nearly gasped again. Beyond the bruises on her face, her shoulders and wrists were covered in cruel marks, purple and reddish contusions like silent accusations. I stood motionless, gripping the edge of a table, fighting to contain the inferno of rage burning within me. What did this bastard do to you? I thought, but dared not voice it, fearing it would trigger another wave of Clara's tears. Dr. Garcia meticulously noted each injury, her face grim. "We need to do an X-ray to see if she has any fractured ribs," she stated, her voice grave but firm. I nodded, silent, watching Clara lie there, her eyes closed as if trying to escape her grim reality. While awaiting the results, I went down to reception to sign her treatment papers and pay a deposit. My cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating. An unknown number appeared on the screen, but I knew immediately. If someone was calling at this hour, right after Clara arrived at my house, it could only be Julian. Rage surged through me, and I hung up without answering. He didn't deserve to speak to me, not after what he had done. When I returned to the room, Clara had fallen into a light, exhausted sleep. I pulled the blanket up, my hands still trembling. Seeing her face, I remembered the Clara from before, the cheerful little girl who used to run after me in the yard, shouting, "Mom, look at me." Now that joyful smile was gone, replaced by wounds and fear. I sat by the bed, watching her sleep, my heart in pieces. I was her mother. I had promised to protect her, and I had allowed her to fall into the hands of a man like Julian. I blamed myself, but at the same time, a fierce flame of determination began to burn within me. I couldn't allow my daughter to suffer any longer. Never again. After they put her on in 4 and confirmed she was stable, I took Clara home. I made her a glass of warm milk, left it by her bed, and quietly closed the door, ensuring she was deeply asleep. It was almost dawn, a faint light filtering through the window. I stepped out onto the porch to tidy up a bit and saw Mrs. Elena, our neighbor across the street, sweeping her yard. When she noticed me, she hurried over, her voice rushed. "Did something happen at your house last night, Elizabeth?" I heard knocking and some crying. I sighed and briefly explained that Clara had been beaten by her husband, kicked out of her home, and had sought refuge with me in the middle of the night. Mrs. Elena gritted her teeth, her eyes flashing. How dare he treat his wife like that? That man has no shame. I nodded, saying no more, but felt a quiet surge of relief. I had an ally. Suddenly, I remembered that Mrs. Elena had a security camera at her entrance. "Hey, Mrs. Elena, could your camera have recorded anything last night?" I asked. She nodded immediately, opened the app on her phone, and showed me the video. I recorded the scene on my own phone. Clara at my door, knocking desperately, her faint cries echoing in the night. Seeing that image made my heart ache all over again, but at the same time, I knew it would be a crucial piece of evidence. I took Mrs. Elena's hand, thanking her from the bottom of my soul. She just patted my hand and said firmly, "Don't forget to get justice for that girl. I trust you can do it." I went into my bedroom, opened the closet, and looked at my police uniform hanging impeccably. The blue shirt, the khaki pants, the belt, and the gun holster. Everything seemed to be waiting for me. I took each piece, feeling the rough fabric under my fingers. In silence, I changed, buttoning each button, adjusting the belt. Each movement was like an oath. I was not only Clara's mother, I was also an officer, and I would use everything I had to protect her. When I finished, I picked up the phone and dialed Arthur Miller, the family lawyer. His voice sounded sleepy on the other end. "Hello." I was brief. "Arthur, initiate the plan right now." He was silent for a moment and then asked, "Elizabeth, are you sure?" I answered without a second of hesitation. "Completely. Get ready." I hung up and went to the living room. I took my digital camera out of a drawer. I approached the bed where Clara was sleeping, carefully removed the blanket, and began photographing each of her injuries. The split lip, the bruised eye, the massive bruise on her stomach. Every time the flash went off, I felt I was not only documenting the physical wounds, but also the deep damage to her soul. When I finished, I sat at the dining room table and spread out all the papers and the USB drive with the video from Mrs. Elena's house. I connected the drive to my laptop and carefully backed everything up. Sitting there, watching the screen light up, I knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. I had entered a war, not just for Clara, but for the justice I had sworn to uphold. By the time I finished backing up the video from Mrs. Elena's camera, the clock read 8 in the morning. Clara was still fast asleep, her face swollen and her lips dry and cracked, as if she couldn't escape the pain even in her dreams. I quietly went into the kitchen and made a bowl of chicken soup. The comforting aroma of onion and herbs filled the air. I brought the tray to her bed and woke her up gently. She opened her eyes, her gaze tired, and was surprised to see me there, dressed in my police uniform. "Mom," she murmured, then shook her head. "I'm not hungry." I sat beside her, trying to make my voice as gentle as possible. "To be strong and move forward, you have to eat." Clara looked at me, her eyes watery, and reluctantly took the spoon, swallowing with difficulty. Seeing her like this squeezed my heart. Just a few years ago, Clara was a radiant young woman, always smiling, filling the house with joy. Now she was here, broken, a shadow of her former self. I decided to take her back to the hospital for another checkup. The bruise on her stomach deeply worried me. Dr. Sofia Garcia received us in the emergency room, her face serious, but without much comment. She ordered a CT scan to ensure there was no internal bleeding. While we waited for the results, I sat in the waiting room, took out my laptop, and connected the USB drive. The video appeared on the screen. At 1:02 in the morning, Clara was at my front door, knocking desperately, her muffled sobs echoing through the microphone. Seeing that image made my heart ache again, as if I were reliving that night. I copied the video to an external hard drive, password protected it, meticulously taking care of every detail. I knew what I was doing was not just to protect Clara, but to build an impenetrable wall of evidence against Julian. Just then, Clara's cell phone rang. The screen read, "Julian Mendez." My heart stopped. I grabbed the phone before Clara could react and turned it off immediately. Clara looked at me, terrified. "Mom, if he finds out I talked, he won't leave me alone." Her voice trembled as if the mere mention of his name plunged her back into darkness. I squeezed her hand tightly, trying to calm her. "I'm here, sweetheart. Nothing is going to happen to you." But I said no more. I just looked at the clock in silence. It was almost 10 o'clock in the morning. I took the SIM card out of Clara's phone and replaced it with another one I had ready. I didn't want him to find her. I didn't want him to have the chance to threaten her again. The CT scan results came back a few minutes later, confirming that Clara had several severe soft tissue contusions, but luckily no internal bleeding. I let out a breath, but the relief was momentary. The physical wounds on Clara's body would heal, but the ones in her soul, I knew, would need much, much more time. I took her home and called Arthur Miller, the lawyer. "I have the medical records and the video from the neighbor's camera," I told him bluntly. He scheduled a meeting at his office in the afternoon to gather all the evidence. Meanwhile, Mrs. Elena came over with a pot of still hot chicken broth. "This is for Clara to regain her strength," she said with her warm voice. "If you need a witness, count on me." I looked at her, feeling her sincere support, and my heart felt a little stronger. In the afternoon, Clara tried to rest, but she would wake up startled from nightmares. I sat by her side, trying to calm her, but she just babbled fearfully. Julian pushed me, and Isabella, she was in a corner mocking me. Hearing that, I felt the blood rush to my head. "Who is Isabella?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. Clara told me in a weak voice that Isabella was Julian's mistress, that she had brazenly come to their house several times, showing off, provoking Julian to take his anger out on her. Her story was like a knife twisting in my heart. I had eaten at the same table as Julian. I had thought he was a decent man who would take care of my daughter, and now it turned out he was not only cheating on her, but allowing another woman to humiliate her in her own home. Sitting by the bed, I took out my cell phone and took close-up pictures of the bruises on Clara's wrists, including the watch to show the exact time. With every picture I took, I felt I was not only documenting the physical wounds, but also the profound pain my daughter carried. I knew these photos would be crucial evidence, but they were also a stark reminder of what I had to do to protect her. In the afternoon, I took Clara to Arthur's office with a portfolio containing all the evidence I had gathered. He opened it and laid everything on the table, the photos of the injuries, the medical report, and the video on the USB. Arthur nodded, his voice firm. "This is a pretty solid foundation. Now we just need to prove public adultery, and he'll have nowhere to run." I gripped the handle of my purse, knowing perfectly well what my next step was. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a cop, and I would use everything I had to make Julian pay. That night, I didn't take Clara to my house. I didn't want her to be in a place where Julian could find her. Instead, I left her at Mrs. Elena's house, my trusted neighbor. She opened her doors for Clara to stay the night and promised to keep a close eye on her. I returned home alone, my heart heavy. I took off my police uniform and put on an old jacket and jeans, trying to look like an ordinary person and not an officer actively seeking evidence. I took the digital camera out of the drawer, checked the battery and memory card, and left in my old car. Every turn of the tires reminded me that I was entering a war, not just for Clara, but for the justice I had sworn to uphold. I parked the car in a dark alley near the Arches bar, the place Clara had told me Julian frequented. The neon light from the establishment illuminated a small section of the street. I sat hunched in the car, camera in hand, waiting. Around 8 p.m., Julian's silver truck appeared, its headlights sweeping the alley. My heart raced, but I remained calm and turned on the camera, ready. A few minutes later, a woman emerged from the corner. She was wearing a tight red dress, her lips painted a deep color, and a cigarette in her hand. She walked with a provocative confidence. I recognized her immediately. It was Isabella Salgado, the woman Clara had told me about, Julian's mistress, the one who had contributed to my daughter's suffering. Julian turned off the engine, got out, and opened the door for Isabella, wrapping his arm around her waist with practiced familiarity. Seeing him, I felt my blood boil. He, the man who had sat at my table, who had called me mother-in-law, was now openly embracing another woman while my daughter lay in a bed covered in bruises. I snapped picture after picture. The neon light from the bar clearly illuminated their faces. Each photo was like a stab, but also another crucial piece in the puzzle I was assembling to unmask him. I followed them from a distance to a small hotel with a flashing red light sign. I didn't get too close, just stayed far away, and took a couple more photos of them entering the lobby hand in hand. Then I went around to the parking lot and took a picture of Julian's truck license plate, making sure a nearby digital clock showed the exact time. Each photo was a bullet, and I knew I had what would leave him with no escape. When I got home, I opened my laptop and moved all the photos to a special, password-protected folder. I called Arthur, the lawyer, with a determination I couldn't hide. I have the photos of his infidelity. You can clearly see their faces. You can see the car's license plate. Arthur responded with a firm voice. Excellent, Elizabeth. Keep them safe. Don't let him know you have them. I nodded, although he couldn't see me, feeling a little more relieved, knowing I was one step closer to justice. Just then, my cell phone vibrated. It was Clara calling from Mrs. Elena's number. Her voice sounded distressed. Mom, he just called a friend of mine to ask where I am. When she told him she didn't know, he threatened her, too. I'm so scared. Hearing Clara, I felt my heart shrink. My daughter, even though she had escaped Julian, was still tormented by his threats. I reassured her, you stay calm. Stay at Mrs. Elena's house. I have him under surveillance. But inside, I knew I had to act faster before he found a way to hurt Clara again. I immediately contacted Captain Alex Rodriguez, a trusted colleague at the station. I presented him with all the evidence I had gathered. The video from Mrs. Elena's camera, Clara's medical history, and the photos of the infidelity. I need you to send a patrol to watch the neighborhood, especially Mrs. Elena's house, I said, my voice hard. Captain Rodriguez agreed without hesitation, but not without warning me first. Elizabeth, what you're doing is very dangerous, but if you have enough evidence, I'm sure you'll win. I thanked him and gave him a copy of the infidelity photos in case something happened to me. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. I sat at the dining room table, organizing all the data into files, proof of the injuries, the camera video, and the photos of the infidelity. Each file was like an accusation, one more step to bring Julian to justice. But in my heart, I couldn't shake the pain. I had once considered him a son. I had believed he would protect Clara. And now, not only had he betrayed her, but he had dared to raise a hand to her, to threaten her, all for another woman. That pain, like a deep cut, hurt me every time I thought about Clara's bruises. The next morning, I took Clara to Dr. Lena Hansen, a psychologist Arthur had recommended. Clara desperately needed help to overcome the trauma of the days of abuse. I stayed in the waiting room, my heart heavy, watching my daughter walk into the office, slowly, with her shoulders slumped, was like a stone in my chest. I, who thought I was a strong mother, a tough cop, had not been able to protect her from the man I trusted. That pain, like a deep cut, flared every time I remembered Clara's bruised face. While I was sitting there, my phone vibrated. It was Mr. Mateo Vargas, the head of the Public Property Registry, whom I knew from some previous dealings. His voice sounded grave and a little rushed. Mrs. Arriaga, it's not wise to talk much on the phone, but I just saw your name and your daughter's on a land transfer file. Something strange. If you have time, you should come by. I frowned, not understanding what he was talking about. Clara and I hadn't done any transfer paperwork, but a bad feeling made me get up immediately. I told Dr. Hansen I would be back for Clara later. When I arrived at the public registry, Mr. Vargas motioned for me to enter his office. He opened a file, frowning. There's something strange here. This land was transferred to an Isabella Salgado last week, but since you didn't call me to confirm, I found it odd. I froze. I felt my blood run cold. It can't be, I exclaimed, my voice choked. Clara and I never signed anything. Mr. Vargas shook his head and handed me the file. The signatures are here, with your name and your daughter's, and the transaction is already filed. I took the paper and saw shaky signatures that looked nothing like ours. I immediately asked, who came to deliver these papers? Mr. Vargas replied in a low voice. The employee told me it was your son-in-law, Julian. He said you had asked him to handle it because you were busy. Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. Julian had not only hit Clara, not only cheated on her, but he had dared to forge our signatures to steal the land, my father's inheritance, what my family had cared for years. I tried to stay calm and asked Mr. Vargas for a photocopy of the file. He sighed. Someone from in here surely helped him with the paperwork. Before I left, he whispered, "Elizabeth, this is dangerous. Be careful that no one in the office knows I told you." I nodded, thanked him, and promised not to betray him. But inside, I felt like I was walking on pins and needles. Julian was not just a violent man. He was a manipulator, willing to do anything to get his way. In the afternoon, I went to pick up Clara from her therapy. She looked tired, but her gaze was no longer one of panic. I took her directly to Lawyer Arthur's office with a photocopy of the forged papers. Arthur reviewed them carefully, tapping the table with his fingers, and said firmly, "This is the final nail in the coffin. Now we also have proof of fraud, enough for him to have no escape." Clara, sitting next to me, listened in silence, but her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, he dared to forge the signatures to steal Grandpa's land," she said with a trembling voice, both pained and indignant. I took her hand and squeezed it, trying to give her some strength, but I was also fighting my own pain. That land was not just a property. It was a memory. It was my father's sweat, something our family had cared for generations, and Julian had dared to trample all over it just for his ambition and his betrayal. That night, I met with Captain Rodriguez and gave him the copy of the fake papers. He nodded, his gaze serious. "Your evidence is very solid. I assure you, he won't get away." I thanked him, but I still had a weight on my heart. When I got home, I locked all the documents in the small safe in my bedroom. The clock showed almost midnight, but I wasn't sleepy at all. I sat in the dark thinking about Julian, about what he had done to Clara, to our family. That pain, like a slow fire, burned and drove me at the same time. I knew the time had come to face him directly. There was no other option. On Saturday morning, I left Clara at Mrs. Elena's house, the safest place for her at that moment. Captain Rodriguez had someone watching outside, and I knew she would be protected, but my heart was not at ease. I put on civilian clothes, an old jacket, and jeans. But I hid a file in my bag with the evidence I had carefully prepared. The photos of Clara's injuries, the video from the neighbor's camera, the hospital report, and the photocopy of the fake land papers. I drove my old car to Julian's pawn shop, the place where he did his business and flaunted his power in town. Every turn of the tires reminded me that this was not a simple trip, but an inevitable confrontation. The pawn shop was open. A smell of machine oil and cigarette smoke hit me in the face. Two of Julian's henchmen were arranging things on the shelves and gave me a sideways glance when I entered. One of them smiled mockingly. "Look, the mother-in-law arrived." I ignored them and walked straight to the back office where Julian was sitting, counting money with stacks of dollar bills piled on a wooden desk. He looked up and gave a fake smile. "What's up, police mother-in-law? Are you so unoccupied that you have time to visit your son-in-law?" His voice was loaded with sarcasm, but I paid him no mind. I hadn't come to argue or chat. I put the file on his desk. Each page was like an accusation. The photos of Clara's bruises, the video from Mrs. Elena's camera with my daughter's cries in the early morning, the hospital report detailing her injuries, and the photocopy of the fake papers he had dared to sign for me and for Clara. Julian glanced at them. His face changed for an instant, but he quickly regained his air of confidence, hiding it with a contemptuous smile. "And what about these little papers? I have better lawyers than you." I looked him in the eyes, my voice cold. "I didn't come to argue with you. If you want to see who's right, we'll see each other in court." He jumped up, his voice restrained as if I had touched his pride. "Who's going to dare to touch me? Who's going to stand against me in this town?" I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in his arrogant eyes. "I will. Don't think everyone is afraid of you, Julian." The two guys at the entrance tried to approach, but I put my hand in my jacket pocket, revealing my police badge. They stopped dead in their tracks, their gazes evasive. Julian turned red, slammed the table hard, and almost shouted, "Your daughter is a weakling. She deserved to be disciplined, and don't think that badge will always save you." Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. He dared to say that Clara, my daughter, whom I loved more than my life, deserved to be disciplined. He dared to justify the bruises, the night Clara had to flee in pain. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to pounce on him and grab him by the neck. But I held back. I didn't answer, just collected the file in silence, put it in my bag, and turned to leave. Before I left, I turned back and said firmly, "Just so you're clear, from now on, the rules of the game have changed. It's not you who's going to discipline anyone. It's the law that's going to discipline you." Julian shouted at my back, "If you walk out that door, you stop being my mother-in-law, and then don't complain if I get nasty." I stopped, looked at him one last time without a hint of fear. "Well, consider that from now on you are no longer my daughter's husband." I went out into the street where the wind was kicking up dust from the dirt road. I got in the car and immediately called Arthur. "It's time to file the lawsuit." Arthur replied, his voice calm but cautious. "All right, get ready. He's going to counterattack with everything he's got." I nodded, though he couldn't see me, my heart as cold as steel. I knew this war wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. A few days after my confrontation with Julian at the pawn shop, rumors started spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire. Early in the morning, I went to the market for some vegetables, trying to act normal, but the whispers reached my ears. Two ladies at the corner stall were whispering, "That Clara probably made it all up. They say she talked back to her husband a lot. That's why he hit her." I walked past them and they fell silent, but their gazes followed me as if I were the one causing trouble. In the cafe next door, an old man sipped his coffee and shook his head. "Elizabeth is now using her badge to screw over her son-in-law." Hearing that, it felt like a dagger in my chest. These people who greeted me every morning, who smiled at Clara when she was a child, now so easily believed Julian's lies. I lowered my head and quickened my pace, trying not to let them see my eyes welling up with tears. At noon, Arthur called me to his office. He placed a stack of papers in front of me, his voice grave. "Julian just hired Mr. Victor Sanchez, a lawyer from Mexico City. He filed a countersuit. He says Clara made everything up to extort him and that you're abusing your authority as a police officer." I took the lawsuit. I saw Mr. Sanchez's signature in blue ink, still fresh. The words on the paper were like direct accusations against Clara and me, as if we were the bad guys, the ones trying to ruin Julian's life. Clara, sitting next to me, turned pale and said with a trembling voice, "Mom, he wants to make me out to be a liar." Seeing her, I felt my heart clench. Clara, my sweet daughter, now had to endure not only the bruises on her body, but also the slander of the man she once loved. I took her hand and squeezed it, trying to give her some strength, but inside I felt an indescribable pain. I had thought this town, where I was born and raised, would be on our side, but now it seemed the whole world was turning its back on us. In the afternoon, I took Clara to Mrs. Elena's house. As we passed through an alley, I saw Julian's two henchmen, the shadows, standing there smoking, staring at us. One of them lifted his chin and said sarcastically, "Be careful. People around here believe Julian more than you." I didn't answer, just squeezed Clara's hand and got her into the house. But those words were like stones thrown at my heart, making me feel more alone than ever. I immediately called Captain Rodriguez to inform him of the threat. He promised to reinforce patrols at night, but his voice also sounded worried. "Elizabeth, be careful. That guy is trying everything to turn the situation around." I nodded and thanked him, but inside I knew I was walking a very dangerous path. That night, I went to the corner store to buy something to eat. The owner and acquaintance of many years took me to a corner and whispered, "Elizabeth, be careful. People are saying all over that you made everything up to take the land from your son-in-law." Hearing that, a chill ran down my spine. The people who had been my neighbors, with whom I had shared stories, now believed I was a schemer. I thanked her, tried to smile, but as I left the store, I felt the world was caving in on me. When I got home, I found an unmarked envelope slipped under the door. Inside, a note in scribbled handwriting. "Shut up or you lose your daughter." I took the paper. My hands trembled, but not from fear. I was furious. Furious because Julian dared to threaten my daughter. Furious because the people around me were so easily manipulated. I carefully filed the note in the evidence file, knowing it would be another piece to unmask him. Late at night, I had an emergency meeting with Arthur at his office. He saw the threatening note and nodded slightly. Good. The dirtier he plays, the more he tangles himself up. But public opinion is on his side. We need a strong blow to change things. And the only one who can do that is Isabella. Hearing Arthur mention Isabella, I felt a small light of hope ignite in the darkness. Isabella, Julian's mistress, could be the key to turning the situation around. But at the same time, I knew bringing her to our side wouldn't be easy. I stood there in the dim light of the office, thinking about Clara, about the bruises on her body, about the lies that were suffocating us. That pain, like a slow fire, burned and drove me at the same time. I was not going to let Julian win. I was not going to let his lies hide the truth. The day after the tense confrontation at the pawn shop, I found out that Isabella used to frequent a small bar at the end of Hidalgo Street. I knew it was my chance to change the course of the game, to turn the tables on the hand Julian thought he had won. I put on a baggy jacket and a cap, trying to go unnoticed. When I entered the place, ranchera music was blasting. Cigarette smoke hung in the air, and the smell of beer and tequila mixed in the atmosphere. I chose a table in a dark corner, sat down, and kept my eyes on the door. I didn't want to be recognized. I didn't want any of Julian's people to see me before I could talk to Isabella. Around 10 at night, she appeared. In a short, tight dress, her lips painted a deep red, and a cocktail in her hand. She walked with a confidence that seemed forced. I looked at her and felt a mix of anger and pity. This was the woman who had contributed to my daughter's suffering, but at the same time, I knew she was also just a pawn in Julian's game. I took a deep breath, got up, and sat across from her. Isabella raised an eyebrow, her voice defensive. "And who are you?" I didn't answer right away, just placed an envelope on the table in silence. Inside was a copy of the fake land papers Julian had schemed, along with a bank statement for Isabella full of accumulated debts and the risk of foreclosure. I looked her in the eyes and said sharply, "I'm Julian's mother-in-law. If you stay on his side, you'll go down with him, but if you cooperate, you'll save yourself." Isabella let out a mocking laugh, but it vanished from her face as soon as she opened the envelope and saw the papers. She turned pale. Her gaze faltered as she saw the forged signature on the transfer and the red numbers of her debts. I continued in a cold but firm voice. "The police captain already knows everything. As soon as the trial starts, you'll be called to testify for fraud, and you could even face a serious sentence. Is that what you want?" Isabella was quiet for a long time. The hand holding her cocktail was trembling. She downed her drink in one gulp, as if to give herself courage, and then said in a shaky voice, "Julian promised me he'd give me a share of the land. He said everything would be fine, that I would have it all. But now I understand he just used me." Hearing her, I felt a bit of pity. Isabella, though misguided, was another victim of Julian's manipulation. But I didn't let my emotions get the best of me. I looked at her intently. "You have one last chance to get out of this clean. Tell the truth at the trial, that I will take that into account." Just then the bar door swung open and Julian's two henchmen walked in. They looked around and their eyes locked on me sitting with Isabella. They approached with unfriendly faces. Without hesitation, I took my police badge out of my pocket and placed it on the table. "Want to try something? Go ahead." The dim light of the place shone on the badge, and the two guys stopped, slowly backing towards the door, their eyes still full of hatred. Isabella was breathing heavily, pale as a sheet. Clinging to the edge of the table, I looked at her and said in a grave but determined voice, "See? Julian can't protect you. He's only going to drag you down with him." Isabella bit her lip. Her eyes were torn between fear and determination. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll testify, but you have to promise me I'll be safe. I didn't promise much, but I just nodded. If you do the right thing, I'll do everything I can. I immediately called Captain Rodriguez, told him the situation, and asked him to get a secure apartment on the outskirts for Isabella to hide in. Leaving the bar, I walked down the cold, dark street, the wind making me shiver, but inside I felt a great relief. I knew the battle had turned. Julian had just lost his most important piece. The morning of the trial, I woke up at 5 when the sky was still dark. I went to the kitchen and made a light chicken broth. The gentle aroma seemed to want to calm the tension that filled the house. I brought the tray to the bed where Clara was still sleeping. Seeing her there, her face still a little swollen and her lips dry, squeezed my heart. I woke her gently, whispering, "Eat something, honey, so you'll have strength." Clara opened her eyes, her gaze tired, but she nodded and sat up slowly. I helped her put on a long, light blue dress and put a thin scarf around her neck to cover the bruise that was still visible. I fixed her hair and said softly, "You don't have to hang your head anymore." Clara looked at me, her eyes watery, but she didn't say anything. Just took my hand, as if it were the only way to feel safe. Outside the house, Captain Rodriguez was already waiting for us with a patrol car. He greeted me with a nod. His look was serious but warm. "I've arranged an escort, Elizabeth. Everything will be fine today," he said. I thanked him, feeling a bit of relief, knowing I wasn't alone. On the way to the courthouse, I saw the town's people gathered in the square whispering. Some looked at us with curiosity, others nodded slightly, as if in support, but there were also those who shook their heads with mistrust. The rumors Julian had spread still hung in the air, and I knew that today's battle was not just against him, but to reclaim the truth. Arriving at the courthouse entrance, I saw Julian. He was standing there in an impeccable suit, his face red and his gaze sharp as a knife. Beside him, his lawyer, Mr. Victor Sanchez, seemed calm, but I knew he was tense. Isabella was there, too, standing far from Julian, her arms crossed and her gaze distant. Seeing her, I remembered the night at the bar when I convinced her to switch sides, and I felt a spark of hope. But I knew today wouldn't be easy. I took Clara's hand and led her into the courtroom. Inside, the place was packed. The old wooden benches creaked as people settled in. I saw Mrs. Elena in the back row. She nodded at me encouragingly, as if to say she would always be there supporting us. Judge Evelyn Thorne entered, and the whole room stood up. The air felt thick. The only sound was the whir of the ceiling fan, like the heartbeat of the room. Lawyer Arthur began. His voice was deep and confident. He presented the case. Each piece of evidence was laid out before the court. The photos of Clara's injuries, Dr. Garcia's report detailing the lesions, the video from Mrs. Elena's camera that recorded Clara's cries in the early morning, and the copy of the forged land papers that Mr. Mateo Vargas had provided us. When Arthur projected the video on the screen, Clara's knocks on the door and her faint sobs filled the room. I heard murmurs among the people. Some were wiping their eyes. I looked at Clara beside me. Her hands were shaking and her head was bowed. I put a hand on her shoulder and squeezed it gently, as if to tell her I was still there, that I would always be there. Lawyer Mr. Sanchez rose to rebut. His voice was sharp. Clara invented everything to extort my client. Elizabeth Arriaga abused her authority as a police officer to coerce and slander. Those words were like daggers in my heart. I wanted to jump up to scream that he was lying, that Clara's bruises were not an invention. But Arthur signaled for me to calm down. He presented Julian's threatening messages, which were clearly visible on the big screen. "Shut up if you don't want to be replaced." The room fell silent. Clara bowed her head. Her hands trembled more violently, and I knew she was remembering the month she lived in fear. I squeezed her shoulder, trying to give her some of my strength. Then it was Isabella's turn. She took the stand, trembling, her gaze hesitant. "Julian promised to give me a share of the land," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "He pressured me to accept the transfer papers, saying everything was arranged. But the truth is he forged his wife's signature to steal the land from her." Julian jumped up, shouting, "You betrayed me." The court guards had to force him to sit down while Judge Thorne said sternly, "Order, or I will have you removed from the courtroom." Isabella bowed her head, but continued to testify. Each word was like a hammer shattering Julian's lies. Seeing her, I felt a little relief, but I couldn't help the pain in my heart. Isabella had been part of Clara's suffering, but now she had chosen to be on the side of the truth. When it was my turn, I took the stand and swore before the court. I looked directly at the people, my voice firm. I am a police officer, but today I am here as a mother. I will not allow anyone, not even my son-in-law, to destroy my daughter and mock the law. I pointed at Julian without a trace of fear in my eyes. That man is not a husband. He is not a father. He is just an abuser and a liar. The whole room murmured. Some of the people who had believed in Julian looked at each other confused. I saw Mrs. Elena's gaze. She nodded as if telling me I had done the right thing. Finally, Judge Thorne stood up to read the verdict. His voice was grave and clear, but I didn't hear every word. I only knew that he issued a protection order for Clara, froze all of Julian's assets, nullified the land transfer, and sent the case to the district attorney's office to investigate the crimes of usury and domestic violence. A roar of murmurs filled the room. Julian slumped in his chair, his face pale, as if all his strength had vanished. Mr. Sanchez remained silent, taking off his glasses to wipe away the sweat. I took Clara's hand and led her out of there. The midday sun shone brightly on the courthouse steps, and I heard people whispering, "Elizabeth won. Justice won." But inside, I knew that this victory did not erase the wounds Clara had suffered. I only hoped that from this day on, she could begin to find her smile again. The afternoon of the trial, when Judge Evelyn Thorne finished reading the verdict, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. I didn't hear every one of his words, but when I saw Julian collapse in his chair, his face pale, I knew we had won. The ruling dictated a protection order for Clara, froze Julian's assets, annulled the fraudulent land transfer, and sent the case to the district attorney's office to investigate the crimes of domestic violence and usury. When I took Clara's hand and we left the courthouse, the midday sun was shining on the steps, and I heard people whisper, "Elizabeth won. Justice won." But inside, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But the pain was still there, like a scar that would never fully heal. That same afternoon, the police went to Julian's pawn shop to arrest him. People crowded the street to watch. Some whistled at him. Others shouted insults to his face. I wasn't there. But the next morning, when the local newspaper published a photo of Julian in a prison uniform and handcuffs under the headline, "Pawn shop owner arrested for violence and land fraud," I felt something strange. It wasn't joy. It was a kind of liberation. He who had sat at my table, who had called me mother-in-law, was now paying for what he had done. But that feeling was quickly replaced by sadness. I had trusted him. I had thought he would take care of Clara. The pain of being betrayed by a family member, like a slow burn, still seared inside me. Isabella disappeared from town a few days after the trial. It was rumored she had gone to Monterey to look for work, to start over. I didn't blame her. She had been part of Clara's pain, but in the end, she had chosen the truth. Julian's two henchmen, known as the Shadows, were also arrested for witness tampering. The neighborhood suddenly felt calmer. There were no more hateful glares or silent threats. But I knew that the wounds Julian had left on Clara and me wouldn't disappear so easily. Clara moved in with me permanently. The first few days, she could barely sleep. She would wake up startled every night, sweating, screaming, "Mom, he's coming." In those moments, I would sit by her side, take her hand, and whisper, "It's okay, honey. You're safe now." But seeing Clara, I saw myself years ago when I, too, kept silent in the face of my own pain. I took her to Dr. Lena Hansen, the psychologist, every week, without fail. Dr. Hansen listened to Clara with patience, helping her face her nightmares step by step. After a few weeks, I started to notice a change. Clara no longer covered her face when she went out. She no longer hung her head when she walked through the market. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen making enchiladas, and as she folded the tortillas, she sang softly. That song, as gentle as the wind, brought tears to my eyes. It had been so long since I had heard my daughter sing. It was as if the sun was starting to enter the house again. The town also began to change its attitude. The neighbors who had doubted, who had believed Julian's rumors, now greeted me. Some came up to apologize with regret in their voices. Mrs. Elizabeth, we didn't know the truth. I just nodded without resentment. I understood that Julian's lies had been convincing, and not everyone has the courage to stand up to someone like him. Mrs. Elena came to visit with a tray of sweet bread, and she hugged Clara tightly. You turned out stronger than your mother in her day. Seeing them laugh together warmed my heart, as if people's kindness still existed despite the dark days. I continued my work at the station. Every daily patrol was a reminder of my duty. Every time I encountered a case of violence, I felt more determined to help other women break the silence. Once I found a young girl crying outside the station, her eyes red, clutching her purse. I sat next to her and said in a soft voice, "You're not alone. My mother lived it. My daughter lived it, and I too stayed silent once. But today, I know that silence only feeds the monster." The girl looked at me. The tears were still streaming, but there was a new glint in her eyes. I knew I couldn't erase her pain, but at least I could show her that someone was willing to listen. A few months later, Clara felt strong enough to go back to work. She got a job in an accounting office in the town center. That night, she came home late, opening the door with a radiant smile. "Mom, I got the job." I stood up and hugged her with all my might, and we both cried. They weren't tears of pain, but of joy, of liberation. Seeing Clara there, smiling like the sun, reminded me of the little girl who used to run after me in the yard, shouting, "Mom, look at me." I knew the wounds in her heart were still there, but she was learning to move on, to find herself again. That night, I sat on the porch. The wind was blowing coolly. I remembered the night Clara collapsed at my door, her face covered in bruises, telling me in a trembling voice what Julian had done to her. I remembered the months of struggle, the sleepless nights, the moments I thought I would break under the lies and mistrust of the entire town. But then I looked at Clara's smile today and I thought, justice is sometimes slow, but when it comes, it can give you back your breath, your laughter, and even your future. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold now, but I felt a peace in my heart that I hadn't felt in a long time. Clara had come back, and I, though I carried the scars of the past, had found a reason to keep fighting, not just for my daughter, but for all the women who need someone to stand up for them. This echo tale, while fictional, draws its painful truth from real events. Names and locations have been changed to protect identities, but the essence of the struggle remains. We share this not to judge, but in the hope that someone listening will pause and reflect. How many mothers, daughters, and women are suffering in silence, trapped within their own homes. I'm genuinely curious. If you were Elizabeth, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to maintain a fragile peace? Or would you dare to confront everything to reclaim your voice and demand justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses courage, and I firmly believe that standing for truth leads us to brighter days. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button to join the Echo Tales community for more powerful narratives that explore the depths of human experience.